Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? The midterms and the party of the rich versus the party of everybody else. All hell breaks loose in the GOP when John Boehner hints he might vote for tax cuts that don't include tax cuts for the top 2%.
If the only option I have is to vote for some of those tax reductions, I'll vote for them.
John of Orange has now had to walk that back so far that the GOP now says it will vote against, might even filibuster against, tax cuts for the poor, middle class, and slightly well-off if there aren't also cuts for Daddy Warbucks. And they're even talking about another government shutdown if they take the House. And, by the way, the federal deficit under the first full fiscal year of Obama, it's down. It's down by 8%. The federal deficit is down by 8%. It would seem as if you could make enough out of this and the tax cuts for the rich to save the midterms. Good evening from New York. Details about the economy are rarely gripping, surprising, or even digestible. Nevertheless, in our fifth story tonight, Republicans, as we've told you, want to extend the Bush tax cuts for those families making more than $250,000. Democrats, we have reported, only want to extend the tax cuts for those making less. But as the president pointed out today, even if Democrats win, the rich will still get a tax break on their first $250,000. Which means the gripping detail is really this. Democrats want to cut everyone's taxes. Republicans want to cut taxes on every dollar earned above $250,000. And the surprising detail, the deficit is down. The Treasury Department reports the U.S. is on track to record a $1.3 trillion deficit for the first fiscal year of President Obama's presidency. 8% lower. That is 8% lower, despite the stimulus spending, than the 2009 deficit, which included the last months of the Bush presidency and reflected economic policy signed into law by the end of 2008 by President Bush. House Republican leader John Boehner wants to increase that deficit by $700 billion over 10 years by extending those Bush tax cuts on income over $250,000. But with Bob Schieffer yesterday, Boehner even admitted that 97% of small businesses will see no benefit from the cut, and that 3% of what he calls small businesses make half the money.
The Joint Committee on Taxation, which is a nonpartisan body, says that only 3% of those small business people, you keep talking about all the small business people that are going to get taxed, only 3% would be affected by that. Or do you quarrel with that figure? Is that a right figure or a wrong figure?
Well, it may be 3%, but it's half of small business income because obviously the top 3% have half of the gross income for those companies that we would term small businesses.
When Boehner said he would have to vote for Obama's middle-class tax cuts if that was his only option, Schieffer was so incredulous, he asked again, twice.
So you were saying you would vote for the middle-class tax cuts if that's all you can get done?
If that's what we can get done.
But I want to make sure I heard what you said correctly. You're saying that you are willing to vote for those middle-class tax cuts, even though the bill will not include extending the tax cuts for the upper bracket Americans.
Bob, we don't know what the bill is going to say, all right? If the only option I have is to vote for those at 250 and below, of course I'm going to do that.
Oh, you think so? Running damage control today, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said Republicans will vote against tax cuts if the rich are not included. He then said he had no idea who John Boehner was. Connecticut Senator, I made that up, Senator Joe Lieberman now says he will too, and 4 Democrats have indicated they too prefer including income over $250,000 in the tax cuts. But McConnell's office declined to tell the Associated Press whether the Republicans will filibuster. Let's bring in David K. Johnston, the author of Free Lunch, columnist for Tax Notes, and Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter at the New York Times on the subject of taxes. Great thanks for your time tonight, sir.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Boehner admits that the nation's richest 3% make half of all income earned by small businesses. Can you fact-check that or at least explain that figure?
Well, it's a little misleading. About 44% of all of what the IRS calls business profits go to the top 3%. But that includes lawyers, big law firms, not exactly a popular Republican group, doctors, particularly surgeons and specialists. So these, in many cases, are not what we think of as a small business that are creating and adding to the economy, manufacturers, the creators of new kinds of services.
The report from Bloomberg News today was quoting Moody's, that Moody's had studied tax cuts for the wealthy and confirmed what common sense would tell you, that when you cut the taxes of the rich, which is essentially what this boils down to, they don't go out and suddenly hire a bunch of employees. They just put more money in savings. So the question then becomes, what happens to the economy when you cut the taxes of the rich people?
Well, they pile up these huge amounts of capital that they have no place to put to work because there's no demand. There aren't enough people working and earning incomes to buy the goods and services that are being sold. What you do see is increases in the sales of second, fourth, fifth, ninth luxury homes, personal jets, his and her personal jets, $600,000 wristwatches, oil paintings, unproductive assets that do not build the economy.
Well, you need somebody to polish the $600,000 wristwatch, perhaps. But the president still wants to borrow $3 trillion to renew the rest of the tax cuts for the lower 97, 98%. Is that a smart move, but doing so for the top 2% is not, and why?
Well, in the long run, the government needs to balance its budget. And we've only done that 4 times in the last 50 years. Let me make an analogy about this. Suppose, Keith, that you suddenly buy a new house. You're living out in the country, so you have to have 2 cars, one for you and your spouse, and there's an unexpected pregnancy, and both your cars suddenly die. Are you going to say, well, the prudent thing to do is not take on more debt and give up your jobs and therefore lose your house and not be able to care for the baby? Or are you going to say, well, I'm going to have to borrow some money to get 2 replacement cars and knuckle down to pay this off and build my economic future? And that's essentially what the president's proposing. Also, Americans in the bottom 98% are much more likely to spend the money, which therefore creates jobs by circulating it, than they are to save it.
Putting this all together, obviously the rich will do better when the economy does better in almost any economy that you can calculate or create. If that's the case, why don't rich Republicans support whatever will actually make the economy better, even if it means giving some money back to the not so rich so they can spend it and it still winds up eventually with the rich?
Well, some rich Republicans do, but not the ones that we're seeing on Capitol Hill. This is the triumph of ideology and the idea that tax rates are what's important. What's important is how we spend our tax dollars and whether our tax system is encouraging investment in things that produce jobs, or is it encouraging you to buy unproductive things like real estate and to move your factory to China so that you can make more profit by hiring low-cost workers there while destroying work here. So we need to get away from this debate that this is class warfare. And by the way, if it is class warfare, it's being waged in both directions. And to the idea of how do we distribute the burdens of government. And the best way to do that is create a tax system that encourages more investment here at home and more jobs. And right now, we're focused on a tax system that just lets you save money so you can spend it in unproductive ways.
And $600,000 wristwatches. Pulitzer Prize-winning tax reporter David K. Johnston, the author of Free Lunch, and now with Tax Notes. Great thanks again for your time tonight.
Thank you.